Now let's keep the conversation. Nigeria 2015 go with Professor Patrice Omi, professor of economics, a one-time presidential candidate, and someone who has some very, well, quote-unquote, brilliant ideas about how to restructure the enterprise called Nigeria a la Harriet Agbeyi. So Professor, let's continue the conversation with you, with my colleague here, Nyota Egbe, as well. You said you had some very brilliant ideas. I'll put it in that terminology. I wouldn't repeat what you said off camera. Well, we took a break looking for a cup of coffee, but you talked about some ideas, as it were, how to restructure the enterprise Nigeria, perhaps restructure the Central Bank of Nigeria. So let's talk about where the pot of money is.
By the way, I like to think of myself as a professor of entrepreneurship. That is what, my juice flows into.
I like that.
And we can't get Nigeria going until we get the enterprise culture up and running properly. We have a lot of people who have made money in Nigeria through a rent-seeking, basically setup. They go around as rich men, but they have contributed very little value. That's why we see private jets and we see few jobs created. The governments of Nigeria in the 60s essentially created a base for production. What we have is a consumption economy, and that's what's holding us back. Nigeria must produce. If Nigeria is going to produce, we need some radical thinking. In my own reflections and all of that, I've structured Nigeria into zones of development where clusters of states will work together looking at the factor endowments of those parts of the country, creating industrial parks in those areas that will take those endowments they have and build global value chains, out from them, creating jobs and driving things going forward. If you want to take it further in creating support for all of these, I would even think of going towards a central banking arrangement similar to the Federal Reserve System of the US, where you essentially have regional central banks that are focused on driving the productive base of the endowments of those regions. And if we had that happening, you will see a greater stimulation of enterprise activity. You will see state governments becoming more sources of wealth creation in terms of the environment they create, rather than prebendal arrangements of going to collect FAC account and basically distribute.
So Prof, let's take a very quick example. How do you think Lagos, Ogun, and Oyo can work together? Give us a typical example.
Fantastic. How this can work. I tell my friends in Lagos State all the time, stop this thing about megacity Lagos. Think Lagos Ibadan megalopolis. In that arrangement, you have a new city developing around Abeokuta, developing around Ibadan, and you get in a train in Ibadan. 45 minutes later, you are in your office in Victoria Island or Lekki in Lagos. But you have a whole hub growing around there, manufacturing, all kinds of things, and these people are part of the Lagos-Ibadan megalopolis. I cited megalopolis, for example, on the Aba, Port Harcourt corridor, Oka, Agbo corridor, Kaduna, Kano corridor, and development will flow around this place. You locate, we need new cities. Too many people are coming to Lagos, and that's not good for Nigeria. Take a proper factor endowment, build an industrial park, let the city grow organically, not the kind of nonsense we have in Abuja that takes up more than 30-something% of federal government spend for a few civil servants and politicians. This is not wise use of money, So we create these new cities growing organically based on industrial activity, based on all kinds of productive activities, and you will see Nigeria revive. And like in the 60s, where it was bottom-up, subnational governments driving things up, it will begin to give new life. Rather than today, that oil did this damage of center collects and just hands over, and you have rent seekers all over the place crawling. So you have people who have money, but you don't have growth, you don't have wealth being created.
Professor Tommy, some people will bring out the examples of countries like Venezuela, like Singapore, that had to shut down external influences just so that they can build from within. Let's tie that in with small and medium scale enterprises with unemployment and government patronage of these local industries and production. Would that help in any way moving this?
But I think what we need is fundamentally new thinking. Venezuela is not a wonderful example. Venezuela is a country that has Nigerian-type problems. historically. And people forget, again, how OPEC came. OPEC came because essentially Venezuela elected a president in the 50s or 58, Romulo Betancourt, who essentially looked at all the poverty in Venezuela, and Venezuela was producing all this oil. Most of U.S. crude at that time was coming from Venezuela. And he went to the U.S. and said, look, pay us better so that we can, stop the insurgency with improving quality of life of people. And they explained economics to him, and he got very upset and jumped in an aeroplane and flew to Baghdad, and OPEC was born. Yet, Venezuela keeps repeating the kinds of mistakes that we make in Nigeria, such that a few months ago, as these prices crashed, they were back in the mode we were in 1984, when we had essential commodity queues in Nigeria. People were queuing. So, not Venezuela as an example, but there are examples that we should follow. I saw a piece in the papers yesterday which I thought was very, very interesting and good. My friend Professor Akpanekpo was making the point about the limits of the neoliberal tradition. Yes, I admire elements of the Washington Consensus, but he is right. If we are going to drive production in this economy, we've got to, and that's what Singapore did. So you're coming to Singapore example. It was not neoliberal open. They manage a process of production and wealth creation. So we must be obsessed with creating wealth, with production, rather than consumption, which is what is keeping us down. Once we get that passion going, then, yeah, sorry, you're going to jump into that.
I was wondering why your ideas and ideologies are very profiled, as it were, but if you look at the electoral process, the news is still coming in about the turnout of voters at these governorship elections. Now, if we go down the municipal, or what you call the local government elections, that rate is likely going to go below 20%. So the question is, why do we all focus on presidential elections? There was so much heat in the pan. The fry pan was overboiling for the presidential elections, but as soon as that was secured, it looks like the governorship elections go 20% down, and by the time we go to local government, perhaps we're looking at 10% voters turnout. Now, how do we get the people and the politicians to focus more on where we need to focus?
You're absolutely right. The most important government is local government. Unfortunately, because of the structure of our economy since oil, people have forgotten that. And people who don't have capacity are the ones who go into local government. But local governments are the ones closest to the people. And if we begin to get people to understand that government is about serving them. Because to be very honest with you, the Nigerian people are disconnected from government as serving them. They think it's something out there that just somehow determines the way the world is, and they just survive within.
But why are they interested in who becomes the president? That's the question, rather than the local government chairman.
Well,
do you have an answer?
I think that they are interested in who becomes president because the idea has been put in people's consciousness that it's about the top giving out. Is this pre-bend out thing? The man at the top hands out pre-bends. And military rule, the convergence of military rule and oil helped make that happen in Nigeria. Because military is command. The big general at the top, structure. Who sends a colonel down, and then oil came in, so that you don't depend on revenues coming from up there to make things happen. Shell pays the thing to the federal coffer, and the man at the top determines you get this, you get that. That's what created this mindset. And we need to get away from it if we're going to make real progress.
Professor, let me take you up on this one. You've written 2 books now, Why Nations Fail and Why Nations Are Poor. From this analogy...
No, those are examples of books. I've written more than 10 books.
Examples of some of the ones you've written. From your analogy now, does this actually strike you as the reason why we seem to have, like in this case now, the states being poor? Because everything is at the central. But in this situation where we've seen, this political process where we've seen a largely dominated party, coinciding with what the central is going to be looking like, are we going to see this going forward?
Well, we can see progress come. I can probably reveal now that I was part of writing the manifesto of the APC in evolution over several months. And the emphasis was on how to make these kinds of things happen. It's a social democratic agenda that is being created. If that agenda truly is created, then we must have ownership go to the people. We must have everything that government does be about the people, the quality of life that they live. And you cannot but have that be something that the top, if it's really run off of its manifesto, saying to everybody else, look, focus down this way. It's not about hand-downs. It's about creating what moves forward. It must be about the ordinary person. Do they find jobs? Do they have a quality of life? Look, give you an example of what was wrong with Nigeria. Part of the campaign thing was, look at the biggest economy in Africa. Really? The difference does it make to the man who has not found a job? But the Legatun report says it's the most miserable place to live on earth. People must change mindsets from those kinds of statistics that showcase, oh, we are big and great, to those that say, we're happy, we're living well. Those are more important things. And that's how a social democratic agenda rolls out.
Professor, before we go on break, I'm sure Nyota has one.
Professor, what you've just talked about now, where the head is like focused down here, and if, as you said, if they look, if they work from that manifesto, are we likely to see laws changing, like the revenue formula, revenue sharing formula? Would that likely change?
Hopefully.
I know there are some people who will be asking, are you going to play a major role?
We'll take just about 30 seconds of your response on that.
I hope that happens. I hope that serious conversation starts going forward on some of those kinds of issues. I think that we need to change a lot of things. The whole mantra was change. And change shouldn't just be change, it should be change that works.
All right, okay, thank you very much, Professor Nyota, and everyone on the team. Let's change right now. Let's change from the studio to the production room. We'll go on a break. We'll be right back.